In the interwar period, the most advanced Czechoslovak tank design was undoubtedly the TNHP-S, which received the designation LTVZ-38. The light tank Model 38 could not enter service before the German occupation, so its operational history is tied to the Axis powers that utilized it under the names Panzer 38T, T-38, and LT-38. The original design was also significantly modified, resulting in a family of tank destroyers, self-propelled guns, and various other vehicles. Given its significant impact during World War II, the model deserves its own video before we turn towards other subjects. The original decision to develop a successor to the LT-VZ-35 light tank had already been made in 1935, before its serial production commenced. By 1937, all three major manufacturers, Škoda, ČKD, and Tatra, submitted their proposals, with ČKD offering two different designs. One of them was the V8H, a new medium tank that ultimately received the designation ST-VZ-39, but never actually made it to production due to design flaws and technical problems. The other was the TNH, which offered light armor, a 37mm main gun, and a leaf spring suspension with four large wheels. The latter was to offer much greater reliability, while Škoda's improved A7 gun promised better anti-tank capability. Several countries expressed interest, but domestic demand was also present due to the looming German threat. The first 150 LTVZ-38 tanks were ordered in July 1938, but they did not enter service until the German occupation, which came in March 1939. Given that it was a solid design, and that the vast majority of German panzers were still of the already outdated Panzer I and Panzer II models, production continued under the name LTM-38. This was then changed in January 1940 to Panzerkampfwagen 38T, the last letter indicating the tank's Czech origin. Its main attributes did not change much, so the tank still offered the same 37mm gun, twin machine guns, a 123 horsepower Praga engine, a top speed of 42 km per hour on road, and a mass of 9.7 metric tons. A loader was added to the crew, increasing it from 3 to 4, while armor moved between 8 and 30 mm. Later, starting with Ausführung E, front armor was increased to 50 mm, while side armor reached 30 mm to increase protection against more modern Soviet anti-tank guns. By the time of the Polish campaign, 78 tanks had entered service. Most of them were used by 3rd Light Division and its 67th Panzer Battalion. They broke through Polish lines, participated in the siege of Modlin, and finished the campaign losing only 7 damaged tanks. While it did not offer adequate protection, the model proved to be reliable and very mobile, not to mention its very capable gun. The same results were repeated in May 1940, when 7th and 8th Panzer Divisions, under Generals Rommel and Kuntzen, penetrated into France, and within a single week destroyed the medium and heavy tanks of French 1st Armored Division and 1st and 3rd Light Divisions, followed by the Matilda tanks of the British Expeditionary Forces. In June, the final battles took place, after which French forces surrendered, while the British evacuated their remaining units. The two Panzer divisions lost 54 Panzer 38T tanks, but only 6 of them could not be repaired. They did well under capable German generals. By the spring of 1941, almost 600 such vehicles were ready for action. 8th Panzer Division and its 125 Panzer 38T tanks rushed through Yugoslavia, easily pushing aside the weak formations of the Yugoslav army. Bad roads and the mountainous terrain proved to be more damaging along the 660-kilometer journey to the Adriatic, during which most German tanks broke down due to mechanical issues with the clutch, the tracks, or the springs, while the Czech-designed Panzer 38T was more durable. More tanks were being delivered to participate in the next major campaign, which followed just 2 months later. In June 1941, almost 4,000 German panzers faced roughly 12,000 Soviet tanks along the border. 660 of them were Panzer 38T, with another 100 in reserve. In Operation Barbarossa, 7th, 8th, 12th, 19th, 20th, and 22nd Panzer divisions had such vehicles, and while they remained highly mobile on the Russian steppe, they were not a match for the heavier Soviet models such as the T-34 or the KV-1. Total losses in that year reached 773 tanks, so in early 1942, with repairs and newly delivered samples, only 381 remained operational. The last batch, with more than 100 tanks, was delivered to Hungary to serve in 1st Field Armored Division at the River Don. This unit fought with distinction against the Soviet bridgeheads, and later in early 1943, covering the retreat of the light infantry divisions. Its tanks performed well against T-60s, even knocking out a few T-34s, but most of them were eventually lost. Other countries also purchased or received smaller numbers of such tanks. For example, Iran ordered 50. Peru bought 24 and used them in the 1941 conflict with Ecuador, but they remained in service until the 1990s. Slovakia sent a few to the Eastern Front in the first months of Operation Barbarossa, but then refused to utilize the repaired vehicles against heavy Soviet firepower. Romania received 50 tanks in early 1943. These were used in free tank companies after the debacle at Stalingrad. The remaining units retreated to the Crimea, but only 20 of them could be evacuated to Romania, where they even participated in the fighting against the Germans until the end of the war. Bulgaria purchased 10 tanks in mid-1943. They all survived the war, and some of them remained operational until the 1950s. Sweden had ordered 90 samples, but these could not be delivered, so they purchased the production license instead and manufactured more than 200 vehicles until March 1944 in 2 different variations. While the original model was already obsolescent by 1942, its chassis was used to produce various other armored fighting vehicles, while the turrets were used in fixed fortified positions all over occupied Europe. In the same year, the chassis was combined with a modified Soviet 76.2mm field gun, creating the Marder III, whose second variant received the 75mm Pak-40 German anti-tank gun. It served on all fronts, but was vulnerable due to the open-top design. Despite this fact, 1,700 vehicles were delivered during the war, to be slowly replaced by other models. Another design was the first Grille self-propelled gun, of which only 90 were produced in 1943. At the same time, the Flakpanzer 38T was also created for the anti-aircraft units of the Panzer divisions. 141 were delivered in total. Without question, the most successful model was the Leichter Panzerjäger 38T, which later received the name Jagdpanzer 38. Many sources use the name Hetzer for this tank destroyer, but that was a different German design that never made it to production. In any case, the vehicle was developed by early 1944 as a light version of the Stück 3, with a widened and lengthened Panzer 38T chassis, modified suspension, thicker and sloped armor, a new 158 horsepower engine, 1 machine gun, and a 75mm Pak-39 L/48 anti-tank gun, which came from the Stück assault guns. Although the vehicle's weight now almost reached 16 tons, it was still a cheaper and lighter model that could be mass-produced. During the war, almost 2,600 samples were delivered, although some modifications had to be made in 1944 for improved balance and accessibility. Total weight was reduced by 200 kilograms, but other changes were introduced, removing protruding elements and installing a rotating periscope. In 1945, a few dozen vehicles received a flamethrower instead of the main gun, while others sported a 150mm howitzer, but a recovery vehicle variant was also completed under the name Bergepanzer 38. In the late war period, the Jagdpanzer 38 was one of the most common German tank destroyers. It was small, able to destroy almost all Allied tanks, although it could not store a lot of rounds, and it had to face its enemy for adequate protection. It served with distinction in the Panzer divisions and other units, but also in the Royal Hungarian Army, which received 75 of these vehicles. They were used in late 1944 and early 1945 by 20th Assault Gun Battalion, the Cavalry Division, and the St. Laszlo Division. Romania used two captured vehicles, but production continued even after the war in Czechoslovakia, where 249 tank destroyers were delivered to the new army, while another 158 samples were bought by Switzerland. They were still in service in the late 1950s, proving the design's potential.